Interviews and debate in a daily politics look at election news now on BBC Two with Joe Coburn.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Politics. With the election not much more than a week away, the contest for who will get to number 10 is getting serious. After a tricky time following the U-turn on her manifesto, Theresa May is trying to refocus minds on who is best placed to negotiate Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn won praise for staying calm under hostile questioning on TV last night, but it seems he hasn't done his homework on Labour's childcare policy. Nicola Sturgeon has been launching the SNP manifesto this morning. They're promising a big increase in public spending, a rise in income tax and a new immigration policy for Scotland. And we'll be talking about the newest addition to the political lexicon.
I don't mean to be rude, but you seem to be a bit of a glum bucket. And can you tell us, are you enjoying the campaign?
All that in the next hour, and with us for the whole of the programme today, it's the former Cabinet Minister and now Times columnist Michael Gove. He's hoping to be elected again as an MP next week. He was the Justice Secretary until he ran against Theresa May for the leadership of the Conservative Party. But he says she showed very good judgment by sacking him. Well, that's OK then. Welcome. Hi. So yesterday was a bank holiday and the highlight on TV wasn't a Bond film, if you're a political obsessive like us, but the first big live television appearance by Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn of the election campaign. They weren't sharing the stage, but appearing one after the other on Sky News and Channel 4. Let's take a look.
I want to live in a world that's free of the danger of a nuclear holocaust.
We are increasing the funding into the health service and will increase funding into the health service in the future.
We need more police, not less. That's why we're pledged to provide 10,000 more police on our streets, and we want a foreign policy that didn't leave large areas of the world ungoverned.
I think what's important now is that we ensure that we get the best possible deal from Brexit.
Free movement is implicit in membership of the European Union. It obviously stops when we leave the European Union.
In the Labour Party's manifesto, we know the figures don't add up. What is important is that as we look...
Benefits will be paid, of course. Benefits will be uprated.
Of course they'll be paid.
And will be uprated, of course.
What we're doing is putting forward a proposal which means that people don't have to sell their house in their lifetime to pay for care. It means they can pass on savings to their children. And it means there will be that cap.
There is nothing in this manifesto about getting rid of the monarchy, which is another thing you believe in, isn't it?
Look, there's nothing in there because we're not going to do it.
But you do believe in it, don't you?
Last night's debate. Well, we're joined now by the Shadow International Development Minister, Barry Gardiner. Welcome back to the Daily Politics. Thank you. But before I come to you, I want to start with Michael Gove. Do you accept that the hubris of calling a snap election, which Theresa May said she wouldn't do repeatedly, meant that you had to draw up a manifesto very, very quickly, and now you're suffering for it?
No.
Why not?
Well, I think the reason for calling the election was perfectly clear. As the Prime Minister pointed out, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish National Party said that they were going to wreck our progress towards securing a proper Brexit and that we needed to have an election in order to strengthen Theresa's hands. I think what we're seeing across the country is precisely that, people recognising that in 11 days' time, after the general election, we'll be sending someone to Brussels to negotiate our departure from the European Union, and people contrasting, as they did last night, Jeremy Corbyn and the Prime Minister are absolutely convinced that Theresa May is the right person to be in those negotiations.
What evidence is there for that? Because if you look at the polls, for example, they have gone from a 24-point lead for Theresa May to anything between a 5 and a 14-point lead. And actually, if you watched the debate last night, most of the questions were on domestic policy, on things like a social care cap, a massive U-turn committed by Theresa May. So my question again is she now suffering from the hubris of wanting an election to get a bigger majority for Brexit and actually writing a manifesto that has crashed and burned in terms of social care cap and pensioners losing out on the winter fuel allowance?
There are so many heroic assumptions in that question,
Well,
Joe.
try answering any of them.
Well, I will, but it will probably take us the rest of the programme. The first thing is hubris. Well, we will see when the election results are recorded whether or not this was the right decision to make. I think it was the right decision to make, and I think we will see Theresa returned with an increased majority, a strengthened hand.
How big do you think that majority needs to be so that it will be seen as a success? Because, of course, if she only gets a few more seats, will it have been worth it?
Well, that's a game that you'd like me to play, but I'm not a commentator. I'm a participant in this election, and I think the most important...
You have a judgment.
I do have a judgment, and my judgment is that Theresa will emerge strengthened from this process, as she has from this debate process. You ask about the manifesto. There's a stark contrast between our detailed manifesto with a series of policies which are there in order to make Britain a stronger place.
When you say detail, I must interrupt. On costings, for example, there wasn't a cap on social care. Now there is. You're going to take away the universal benefit on pensioners in terms of the winter fuel allowance. We don't know which pensioners are going to lose that benefit. What's detailed about that?
Well, we've had more detail in our manifesto than Labour had in theirs.
That's not the answer to my question. What is detailed about it if we haven't got the figures? I'm going to come to Labour in just a moment.
Well, I'll tell you precisely what's detailed. What is detailed is that we had far more detail about how we're going to fund social care than has ever been shared by any government hitherto. And it's also the case that on the winter fuel allowance and indeed on the double lock, we have a far greater degree of detail about how pensioners are going to be protected than ever before.
Which pensioners will lose the winter fuel allowance?
Wealthier ones.
Right, and they are categorised as?
People with more money.
Yeah, well, that's clear. You can be facetious, Michael Gove, but is there a figure?
Well, I'm merely responding to your questions, Joe, on the basis that you have a preconceived notion. You've bought into a media narrative, which is that somehow...
Michael Gove, that's not going to get you away from not actually putting a figure, which is what pensioners will want to know. They'll be worried about it.
Joe, can I...
Well, of course they're worried about it. One of the reasons they're worried about it is that there's been a deliberate attempt by Labour in order to... terrify pensioners. In fact, as Theresa has clarified, pensioners will have the reassurance of knowing that there will be a cap on the amount that's paid.
And when it comes to getting the numbers right, Barry Gardiner, it just seems that your party has not learned any lessons following the fiasco over police numbers. I mean, another key policy announcement by Labour today on childcare, and your leader, Jeremy Corbyn, didn't know how much it would cost. Let's just take a listen.
How much will it cost to provide unmeans-tested childcare for 1.3 million children?
It will cost... it will obviously cost a lot to do so. We accept that.
I presume you have the figures.
Yes, I do. It does cost a lot to do it. The point I'm trying to make is that we're making it universal so that we are in a position to make sure that every child gets it, and those that can... at the moment, get free places will continue to get them. Those that have to pay won't, and we'll collect the money through taxation, mainly through corporate taxation.
So how much will it cost?
I'll give you the figure in a moment.
You don't know it? You're logging into your iPad here. You've announced a major policy and you don't know how much it will cost?
Can I give you the exact figure in a moment,
Is this not exactly the issue with people and the Labour Party, which came up under Gordon Brown, that we cannot trust you with our money?
Not at all.
You don't know the figure.
All of our manifesto is fully costed and examined.
But you're holding a manifesto, you're flicking through it, you've got an iPad there, you've had a phone call while we're in here, and you don't know how much it's going to cost.
Can we come back to that in a moment?
What, when you've looked it up?
Well, look...
My point is, it's quite troubling. This is a policy you're launching today, Mr Corbyn, and you don't know how much it's going to cost.
Barry Gardiner, how much is it going to cost?
It's going to cost $4.8 billion for the childcare. It's going to cost $0.5 billion for the restoration of over 1,000 Sure Start centres that the government have closed down. And in terms of capital, to increase the available childcare space, it's going to cost $2.7 billion. The point I would make is this, Joe. It wasn't that the figure wasn't there. It wasn't the figure hadn't been costed. Look, this is a rapid-fire general election campaign in which politicians are under spotlight. Do you know the answer to this? Do you know the answer to this? And if I ask Michael, what was it that you spent on early years education in the last year as your administration as Secretary of State for Education? Do you know the figure, Michael?
No.
Right. 2.9 billion.
Right.
Okay. What was it you spent on 5 to 16 education during that period, Michael?
You've made You've made your point.
What, year by year or over the course of the 4 years?
No, in year by year.
It was over. Well, by the time the end of the process, it was about £40 billion.
Right,
no,
you've made your, all right, but you've made your point. The point
that's
is
about £40 billion.
The point for the taxpayer is they want to be reassured that certainly their party leaders and their front bench spokespeople do know how much it's going to cost. Otherwise, it feeds into the idea that Labour want to splurge on spending, but you don't really care as much about how much it's going to cost.
The point is we do know how much it's going to cost. That's why we've produced this document. We are uniquely, as a party, having produced a document, Funding Britain's Future, that sets out very clearly exactly what all those costs are. Now, the Conservatives have not done that.
It's about as reliable as a Maxwell pension document.
And when in fact you asked Michael
4 pages of
whether he knew...
Hang on, go on.
When you asked Michael whether he knew how many pensioners would lose out the winter fuel allowance, he didn't give you any answer, but in fact there are two answers out there from two respectable independent organisations. One says it might be as many as 10 million pensioners, the other says it might be as many as 6 million pensioners. But Michael didn't want to give you that figure.
Well, I don't think he knows the figure because they haven't actually been stated.
You can't say they're wrong. You can't say they're wrong unless you know what the figure is.
All right, well, let's talk about other figures. You are quite right.
Your leader does not know what a flagship policy costs.
No, I'm sorry. He does. He couldn't remember it in an instant.
But is that acceptable in the middle of an election campaign? And actually, hang on, and actually it's not just the childcare policy. As you say, you've got this document, Funding Britain's Future. But yesterday, in that debate that we showed a little earlier, he was asked about benefits being uprated or frozen. Now, in your manifesto, which I have here, and the detail about benefits, it doesn't say that you're going to uprate all benefits, which is what Jeremy Corbyn said in last night's debate.
Sorry, the reason it doesn't say that in the manifesto is the uprating of benefits is already costed in the government Red Book.
Right.
And that's why it doesn't need to be costed here.
Is it going to be frozen? But let's be clear now, because for people on benefits, this is important. Is Labour going to continue with a 4-year freeze on all benefits, which is what the government is doing? And again, that's a figure that is not in their manifesto. It could cost £11 billion to people on benefits. Okay. Are you going to uprate them or are you going to freeze them?
Jeremy's been very clear that they would be uprated each year, and we've already...
All benefits? So job seekers allowance, housing benefit and universal credit?
Let's be clear. He did not say all benefits. What he said that
he said
benefits...
uprating benefits?
Yes, indeed. Uprating benefits does not mean all benefits.
Which ones?
But my point to you is this, and you made the point, and Michael...
Hang on, I'm asking the questions
here.
I know, but this is a good question.
And Michael,
Which one?
And Michael also made the point that you said that people should know when they're launching a policy. You will remember earlier in this campaign, Michael Hammond, if anybody should know, it's the Chancellor...
Philip Hammond.
Philip Hammond, who, when he was asked the cost of HS2, said it was £32 billion. In fact, it's £57.5 billion. My point to you is... These are the nitpicking things.
They're important, though, aren't they, Barry Gardner? It's important to know which benefits are going to be uprated.
And that's why I have set out very clearly what the benefits for childcare are, where that money's coming from. We've costed it and we've shown it in the manifesto.
But which other benefits will be uprated?
Hang on a second. Are you going to, though, uprate universal credit? All aspects of it, which you could say you got that from Jeremy Corbyn's statement.
What we've said is that there is a £10 billion which is as yet unallocated, and it will be £2 billion a year over the lifetime of the Parliament, which will be done after we've reviewed the benefits and looked at the way in which we can uprate them using that £2 billion.
And figures are important. Hang on.
That's exactly what we said. That is in the manifesto, and it is in the
it isn't clear in terms of what you're going to uprate and what you're not going to uprate.
Specifically which.
No, but that is important.
That we're conducting a review. If you remember last night, Joe, When she was pressed by Paxman, Theresa May retreated time and time and time again into, well, we're going to do a review in that. We're going to do a review in that. We're going to do a review in that. But we were up front. We said, we've allocated the money, £10 billion, £2 billion each year.
Well, let's put that to Michael Gove. And that's the difference. Hang on, that's the difference, isn't it, Michael Gove? Green papers, white papers, looking ahead to consultation. There is nothing specific about the big issues in the Tory manifesto. When you say that people will want to know, well, they will want to know what the cap is on social care.
Well,
and they will want to know. Well, there wasn't on social care.
Yes, there was. 82 pages of detail. The difference between Jeremy Corbyn and
I'm
Theresa
asking
May.
about your social care cap. What is the cap going to be? What should it be?
There wasn't going to be one.
There will be a cap. The Prime Minister said that we're going to consult on that.
But we don't know what it's going to be.
No, we don't.
Damien Green said that they wouldn't do a U-turn and there would be no cap. And then 2 days later, she had to come out because she realised that it was the most unpopular manifesto policy that there had ever been.
Well, I think there have been some more unpopular manifesto policies, including Labour's defence and security and foreign policy commitments in its current manifesto.
But answer the question on the social care cap and the impact it's had.
And the specific question about the social care cap springs essentially from a question about how we're going to fund our commitments. And the difference is you have Jeremy Corbyn, who has zero economic credibility, and Philip Hammond and Theresa May, who've been in government for more than 6 years and who've been delivering sustained growth.
And have failed on every single policy they set in 2010.
And on that,
in 2015, they said they would have ended the deficit,
growing, Barry.
and they didn't.
I can see the twinkle in the eye and the smile on your lips. It's a valiant effort to defend your leader. Sadly, in defiance of the facts.
£750 billion
Barry and
added
Michael,
to the national debt.
You may be a knockabout duo here, but you mustn't talk over each other as much because the viewers can't hear.
But in that case, he's got to stop talking.
And so have you. Stay with us. Now, the Daily Politics Mood Box is on tour during the election campaign. I'm beginning to wish I was. And today, Ellie's in Luton, where she's been asking what people think about the big question of security. Ellie.
Joe, I'm in Stockwood Park in Luton, to be precise. Now, the election campaign was postponed last week following those tragic events in Manchester. When it did get back underway, the parties were talking about that big issue of security. Specifically, for example, the Conservatives promised a commission on tackling extremism. The Labour Party promised 10,000 new police officers. The Conservatives also spent the weekend attacking Jeremy Corbyn on his links to Sinn Féin and the IRA during the Troubles. Now, Luton is home to 2 relatively safe Labour seats, but it's exactly the sort of place the Tories have their eyes on if they're going to pull off that big landslide. So it's a good place to ask the question, who do you trust more on the issue of national security, Labour or the Conservatives?
They're not about kicking out people or keeping people. They're about making sure everyone's equal and that. And that's why I choose Labour.
Jeremy Corbyn is much more trustworthy.
Yeah, he seems like such a sweetheart.
Not just that, but even if he didn't know he was a politician, he would seem like a genuine person,
like
someone that's trustworthy.
Really...
Quick question, who makes you feel safer, Labour or the Conservatives?
Neither.
Neither? Why?
Neither.
Why not?
Well, just do not feel that they make me feel safe at all.
When it comes to the idea of national security, I think I'd much rather just trust the people who've been actually taking care of it for the previous while, rather than sort of throwing my lot in with a new crowd.
I think that fate will decide it.
Well, it won't be fate, it'll be voters.
The red rose, the flower.
Yeah.
I really like it.
Right.
The red rose, the flower. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I like Labour.
Nothing to do with national security?
No, I'm about peace and love and unity and care. And
it's very difficult on security because of the Trident thing with Corbyn, but I don't trust the Conservatives on anything at the moment.
Thank you.
Conservatives.
Why?
Because like Corbyn said he wouldn't press the nuclear button because he's an idiot.
Labour. Oh!
No, I mean Labour. Definitely Labour. I just said Conservatives by accident.
I agree with May, but I would rather vote Corbyn.
And also, I like the way Corbyn actually said that the reason why we've got all these problems in our own country is because of the fact we've messed around in other people's countries. So instead of giving these people bread and a form of security of being nice to these people, we've blown up their own children.
Labour or the Conservatives?
On national security?
Yeah. Oh, she's sure. Hang on, she's striding Oh, we've run out of Red Bulls. Luton has been Labour since 1997, and it looks like the town trusts the party more than the Conservatives on the issue of national security. Thank you, Luton.
And thank you, Ellie. So that was our entirely unscientific mood box. But what can the rather more scientific opinion polls tell us about this big election issue? Well, we're joined now by the pollster Joe Twyman from YouGov. Joe, so what is the latest in terms of people's views towards security?
Well, the latest data that comes after the events in Manchester show that around about 4 in 10 people trust the Conservatives on defence and security, and around 2 in 10 trust Labour. And so it's a margin of 2 to 1 in favour of the Conservatives, and even among Labour voters, only around half trust them to make the right decisions. When you look at the individual personalities involved, around half of people trust Theresa May, around a third of people trust Jeremy Corbyn, around a quarter Amber Rudd, and fewer than 1 in 10 Diane Abbott. So a range of views, and no one party completely dominates, but the Conservatives are definitely in the best position.
And what's behind, or what's driving those views and opinions in terms of the party they're backing?
Well, in a lot of cases, in terms of who they're backing on security, a lot of this is to do with historical information and the kind of narratives that the party have been putting out, not just during the campaign, but for some time now. Over the period immediately after the attacks in Westminster, but also after the murder of Lee Rigby and the 7/7 bombings, we actually didn't see much movement in the voting intention figures then. But what we have heard time and again from the Conservatives during this campaign is that they are, to perhaps bore everyone with the line, strong and stable, not just on the issue of the economy, but also when it comes to security. Divisions in Labour over things like Trident have not helped to counter that with their own stories.
What about polling in general?
Well, polling in general, we know that the Conservatives are pushing very hard on the idea of Theresa May as the person who should take the government forward. The polling on that remains pretty consistent. Around half of people say that she would make the best Prime Minister, whereas between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 people say Jeremy Corbyn, and his ratings have improved, and that gap has closed, but it hasn't closed as much as the gap between the Conservatives and Labour in the general voting intention poll, which, as was mentioned at the start of the programme, had a 24-point lead when we started. Since the events in Manchester, the lead was 5% in our poll for the Times on Friday, and then 7% in our poll for the Sunday Times on Sunday. And so that is growing. But the question now that we return to, if you like, normal proceedings, the question is now, will that bump that the Conservatives have enjoyed this far, will it continue, or will it now change as attention moves back to the economy, to childcare, to social care, and all the other issues that will be covered between now and Election Day?
Joe Twyman, thank you very much. Well, Michael Gove, let's just return, though, to the issue of security. Theresa May's been running the Home Office previous to being Prime Minister since 2010. Has she taken tough enough measures to combat Islamic extremism, in your mind?
Yes.
What sort of things do you think could be done now to strengthen the government's hand against extremism?
Well, as the Prime Minister made clear in the context of the manifesto, launching a commission to consider how we can prevent extremism seems to me to be the next logical step.
Really?
What's been, yes.
Is that not going to be just tinkering around the edges?
No, I think it's going to be an enhancement. I think that the first thing to bear in mind is that Theresa's been responsible for deporting more hate preachers than any previous Home Secretary, that she's put in place a counter-extremism strategy which, distinct from the one that we had under Labour, recognises that you don't just seek to prevent violent extremism, you seek to intervene earlier in order to deal with extremism. And she's been very clear that when it comes to the different manifestations of extremist activity, that we need to have a security apparatus ready to keep us safe. And there's a stark contrast there with Jeremy Corbyn, who regards organisations like Hamas and Hezbollah as his friends.
Right. Let's look at the figures, though, because you say they have been the right measures and that she has deported a large number of hate preachers.
Yes.
I don't know the exact number either. But now we do know that the government says there are up to 23,000 potential terrorist attackers in this country, 3,000 of those considered to pose a serious threat and are under investigation or being monitored in 500 separate operations. Those are still very large numbers.
Those are concerning numbers. I think the thing about the 23,000 is I think that we need to be careful about using that figure, because I think it's people who have sympathy with the ideology rather than those who are directly engaged in potential plots.
But could they be radicalised?
Well, there are people who are, I mean, I think each of these figures are figures which are reflective of individuals who already have been on a radical journey. The difference between the approach that we're taking and the approach that the last Labour government took is that we are seeking to intervene before people reach that point where they're ready to press the button on a bomb or pull a knife. We need to do the work at mosque and at street level in order to counter extremism that wasn't being done in quite the same way by Labour.
Right, and the problem there is if Jeremy Corbyn has not backed any of the key pieces of legislation, and when I interviewed your colleague Richard Bergen a couple of days ago, he says it's complicated, it's difficult, you have to look at all the separate bits of the legislation, but there are some key parts of the 2000 piece of legislation, the power to prescribe organisations and ban them. Jeremy Corbyn didn't back that, or the glorification of terrorism. So if you take Michael Gove's point that you need to step in early and intervene, Jeremy Corbyn was against all of those.
No, look, what Jeremy's always been in favour of is making sure that we do not allow the terrorists to dictate the agenda.
And how do you do that?
And that means not letting them undermine the freedoms and the rights that we have in this country, the rights for proper judicial scrutiny when you're being detained. Now, we've heard recently, even Tariq Gafoor coming out and talking about internment, an appalling suggestion. We must ensure, and in fact, all the former heads of MI5 have been very clear about this, both Eliza Mallington-Buller and Stella Rimington.
But you haven't answered my question about why there hasn't been backing by Jeremy Corbyn for previous pieces of legislation.
No, I have. I've precisely explained that, because actually he wants to make sure that the terrorist does not set the agenda. Look, the whole threat to this country has changed from the battlefields of the Middle East to the bedrooms of disaffected youth in this country. And that is why the PREVENT strategy, even David Anderson, who's the previous David Anderson, who's the previous independent reviewer of our terrorism legislation, has said that the PREVENT strategy is causing problems.
Implausible. Jeremy Corbyn led a minute's silence for the IRA in the 1980s.
You just move on, Michael, to a different question.
And Hezbollah, his friends. The idea that Jeremy Corbyn is a credible
shouting doesn't make your point any better for you.
Right.
No, but rebut it.
It doesn't.
No, I'm not shouting.
Hang on,
I'm very happy.
I'm making clear how outrageous it is, Barry, that you are defending as your leader someone who led a minute's silence for Republican
killers. Well, let me broaden that question.
Is it something that voters in Brent North
shouting will not help you, Michael?
Answer the question might help you.
You shouting either won't either, Joe.
No, but does it undermine his credibility?
I'm happy to answer Michael's question, but let's do it in a calm and reasoned way. Okay? The point is, all that we have seen is in this election about security has been trying to focus on smears, newspaper articles from 33 years ago. Let's focus on the policies. Let's focus on what now needs to happen to create a safer country.
And what policies would you enact?
That's precisely what I want to talk about.
Would you have a minute's silence for terrorists?
Hang on, Michael Gove. What policies would you enact?
He's dodging the question, Joe.
No.
I am not dodging the question, Michael. And if you'll give me a minute to come back without interrupting so rudely, because then I will be able to fully answer what the policies are that we're putting in place.
Do the policies and then answer the question.
That is why we are going to put an extra 10,000 police officers on the street, which the present Prime Minister, as Home Secretary, cut by 20,000. She was the one who, the moment she came into office in 2010, cut 5% of MI5, 5% of the Security and Intelligence Service, 5% of GCHQ staff. We've only begun to get back to the numbers of staffing that those security organisations had in the last financial year.
And I'll
7 years later.
Right, that's one policy. You want to increase the number of police officers and the number of security officers.
Can I point out some more as well?
In a moment. Do you now admit that actually cutting those police officers was a mistake? You can't fight. Don't shout at Barry Gardiner for a moment. Just answer my question. That cutting police officers, cutting the number of soldiers in the army who had to go out on the streets of the country after these Manchester attacks, you cannot fight terrorism on the cheap.
I never shout, Joe. I merely asked tough questions which Barry dodged.
Right. Go on. Answer my question.
No, I don't think it was. But I do think it's striking that John McDonnell, before he became Shadow Chancellor, admittedly, wanted to get rid of Special Branch. He argued that we should get rid of MI5. And John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn have been the terrorists' friends, not their enemies, over the course of their political careers. And that is why Barry cannot answer the question.
Barry,
why,
I'm going to
why
give
is he
Barry...
supporting a leader
hang on.
who led a minute's silence for Republican killers?
Answer
Why is
that
he supporting
question,
a leader
Michael,
who calls
we're going to
Hamas
run
and
out of time.
Hezbollah friends?
Answer the questions about the previous associations that have been repeatedly put to you and your colleagues and Jeremy Corbyn. What does it do to the credibility
don't
of
cut
Labour?
the time off to allow me to do it.
Go on, you finish.
The point is this. Jeremy answered those questions very fully last night. He said... on the television last night, in those debates, he said, look, the minute silence that I participated in was for all of the people who had died.
Although that
in
was
Northern
counted,
Ireland.
of course.
Well, we've had nothing but smears from history. Now let's talk about the policies going forward. We are saying that when this government has seen a rise in illegal border people coming in over the border illegally rise from 1,000 a month to 13,000 a month. We are saying that's why we're putting in place 500 further border guards. We think it is ridiculous that you have 3 clippers to actually police the whole of the 11,000 coastline of the UK.
No, Michael, wait a minute.
We have policies that we want to put in place that will make us more secure. When you look at the way in which our prisons are overcrowded.
Barry, I'm going to have to shush you up too, but thank you very much. And Michael Gove, that's it. Now, there's not much more than a week left until polling day, thank goodness, and the parties and their supporters are throwing everything but the kitchen sink at this campaign. Adam, can you tell us more? Adam! Adam! Oh, goodness, what is he playing?
Oh,
there
sorry,
he is.
Joe. I'm actually playing at this. It's called Corbyn Run, a new pro-Jeremy Corbyn game released this weekend. You can see there's Theresa May dropping bags of money on his head. Very subtle political statement there. I'm actually doing quite well, although the music is incredibly annoying. Anyway, talking of Jeremy Corbyn, it turns out he's got a new celebrity backer. I'll give you some clues. He's an actor. He's from the United States, and he starred in such big things as the best Batman film, the sitcom Taxi, and Twins with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Who could it be? Take a look. Can you tell who it is? It's diminutive actor Danny DeVito, who displayed his Corbynista credentials on a visit to London. The baked goods were the star as Lib Dem leader Tim Farron visited a bakery to make some croissants. Eat one. Go on. Eat one. Food was consumed over on the Victoria Derbyshire programme, where they set up Boris Johnson's sister on a blind date with Nigel Farage. Warning, things got saucy.
Could you go to bed with a Remainer? Could you make her see the light?
Do you know what? I'm not going to answer that.
Good grief. Quick, time for a musical interlude. Conservative Friends of India have released this little ditty. For those who aren't connoisseurs of Hindi pop, they're saying, let's join hands with Theresa May for a strong and stable government. In the category marked slightly less flattering,
She's a liar, liar. She's a liar, liar. No, you can't trust her.
this anti-Tory track is currently number 2 in the UK iTunes chart, yours for 79 pence. I wonder what it looks like if we mash it up with some footage we found of Labour's Yvette Cooper teaching people to line dance.
We all know politicians like telling lies. Big ones, little ones, porcupines, saying they're strong and stable, won't disguise. We'll still be...
And finally, the Greens unveiled their secret campaign weapon. Wait for it, a giant question mark to highlight the lack of decent props. I mean, the lack of debate about environmental issues in the election campaign.
Thank you, Adam. Now, the SNP launched their manifesto earlier this morning in Perth. It was delayed from last week after the Manchester bombing. Already in government in Scotland, this is their programme for government in Westminster. So what are they proposing? They want to invest an additional £118 billion in public services, which they say would put an end to Westminster austerity cuts. They say they would fund their spending plans by delaying reducing the deficit and increasing tax revenues by raising income tax to a new 50p rate. They also want to protect the triple lock on pensions, stop cuts to the winter fuel allowance, deliver extra investment for the NHS, social security and other vital public services. There is also a commitment to increase the minimum wage to the same level as the real living wage over the next Parliament. At present, those aged 25 and over are entitled to £7.50 per hour, but the real living wage, currently set at £8.45 an hour, is projected to rise to £10.60 an hour by 2022. The SNP would also like the ability to set its own immigration policy, which they say would give people the opportunity to come and go. They're also calling for Scotland to stay in the European single market after Brexit. On independence, they say Scotland should have a referendum at the end of Brexit process. They'd previously said the end of next year or early 2019. Here's Nicola Sturgeon speaking this morning at her manifesto launch.
This manifesto sets out a clear plan to end Tory cuts, protect Scottish jobs and strengthen Scotland's hand. It is a manifesto with fairness, opportunity and democracy at its heart. A manifesto for a country that is welcoming and outward-looking. A manifesto that reflects our belief in the infinite possibilities open to the people of Scotland if we work together in the common good to build the kind of country we know we can be.
Nicola Sturgeon there. Well, I'm joined now by the Deputy Leader of the SNP, Angus Robertson, who is in Perth. Angus, welcome to the programme. I hope you can hear me all right.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me. I can. I may have to hold my earpiece from time to time, but I can make you out, Joe. Thanks.
Good. So what's changed on independence, Angus Robertson? Why no referendum now till after Brexit? You had wanted next year or early 2019.
Nothing's changed. We've said that we are in favour of the people having a choice about their future when we have clarity, when we have the outcome of the Brexit negotiations. And I think it's sometimes lost in the debate that at the end of the negotiation there is supposed to be a period for the approval or rejection of that deal, because of course all 27 other EU member states will have a say in our future, as well as the European Parliament. And in those circumstances, we feel that that is the appropriate time. If it's right for everybody else to have a consideration in our future, we think we should have that right as well, rather than having others making decisions on our behalf.
But isn't it a massive climb down to change the timing of when you are now demanding to have that second referendum? And actually, in Nicola Sturgeon's speech, there was barely any mention of it. It seems to have disappeared at all. Is that to do with the fact that the dial, in terms of support for a second independence referendum, just isn't moving in your favour?
No, well, whoever was briefing on that subject clearly doesn't know the subject material very well. There's been absolutely no change to our proposals. We've always taken the view that now is not the time, and the Prime Minister and Nicola Sturgeon are at one on that issue. What is important is that people have clarity, people understand what the outcome of the Brexit negotiations are likely to be. And increasingly, I think people are right to fear, regardless of whether they voted leave or remain, that we're heading towards the hardest form of most damaging Brexit. And in those circumstances, it would be absolutely right, and not least, of course, because we've already had an election on that in Scotland, where the party that had a manifesto commitment to holding a referendum on the outcome after Brexit negotiations was the SNP, and we won the election on the circumstances of Scotland being taken out of the European Union against our will. So there is already a democratic mandate for that, and the timing has not changed.
Right, you're going to invest an extra £118 billion for public services. Where will you get the money from?
Well, it's more than that, Joe. It's 128 billion, and it's a mixture of 118 by reprofiling the way the UK manages its overdraft.
Sure.
So rather than cutting as quickly and as deeply as the UK government is planning to do, it is extending that. And then there's also a package of tax rises, which includes those on the highest incomes in the UK, seeing their tax going up from 45 pence to 50 pence, and what that would then allow a UK government to do, and the SNP, and this was outlined today in the manifesto launch, we were in favour of spending on health in England rising to match that in Scotland, because we think that would be the best thing for the UK as a whole. So it's a fully costed manifesto.
Sure,
it's
but how's it actually going to come?
But
how's it going to come about, Angus Robertson? How are you actually going to introduce a 50 pence rate for high earners across the UK?
Well, we would, if there's a majority in the UK Parliament to be sought, that is what we will pursue. But you're right in.
But you're not a UK-wide party, are you, Angus Robertson?
You're suggesting. Well, no, you are, and I think you're suggesting that given the Tories are likely to win the election, that we will be unable to see that voted for in the House of Commons. What we are outlining is what we will support in the House of Commons. If there were a majority to be found, we would work with other like-minded parties to deliver changes like that. But I think
why don't you
are
just do
right
it for Holyrood?
Why don't you?
But why haven't you just done this in Holyrood in Scotland? You've had an opportunity to increase income tax. You've never taken the opportunity to put a 50p rate on.
Well, on the issue of having a differential higher tax rate, there is a risk of losing high taxpayers to the rest of the UK.
You could lead the way,
so if
though.
It's done as a UK-wide. If there's a UK-wide measure, well, we're standing in a Westminster election, Joe, and you're asking us about our Westminster manifesto for a Westminster election.
But
so
you've never shown any enthusiasm. You've never shown. I know, but Angus Robertson, you've never shown any enthusiasm for increasing income tax to actually get more money, and you always blame Westminster. Now you're proposing a UK-wide increase of a 50p rate for high owners when you are a party in Scotland. You're relying on a progressive sort of alliance that the Labour Party has rejected. In other words, you put forward a policy that is never going to be enacted on the basis of what you've put in your manifesto.
Well, you're predicating that on knowledge of the outcome of the general election. Do you know what the outcome of the general election is going to be, Joe?
No, I don't. But do you know that this is actually going to happen? Are you putting realistic policies into your manifesto rather than focusing on the powers you have at your disposal currently to change the economy?
Yeah, Joe, it stands to reason that a Scottish political party standing in a 12th of the United Kingdom is not going to form the majority government in the UK. There's no surprises, no exclusive there in the politics show. However, if there is a possibility in Parliament to make sensible suggestions about having fairness, an end to austerity, being able to have better priorities, protecting the pension, these are the things that we want in the SNP. But what I do know is there's people right across the UK who want these things too. So depending on the outcome of the election, if there is a possibility that like-minded voices in the rest of the UK would support a more progressive form of politics, of course we'd work with them, and of course we would see changes on this as well as the likes of protecting the pension. But in Scotland, where we're standing, that means people have a straight choice, because that's what the election is here, between the SNP and the Tories, and it's only SNP parliamentarians who are going to be standing up for these points, whereas Tory MPs are going to do whatever Theresa May says to them.
What about immigration? You want to control your own immigration policy. Do you have any targets for net migration?
Well, the first thing to say is our key target at the present time is not losing people. And as we already know, we are losing people back to other EU countries. Now, Scotland's experience is that immigration is hugely beneficial. So in the first instance, what we're wanting to do is make sure that EU nationals have guarantees that they can remain. We want to make sure that further nationalities outside the EU aren't being forced to leave. And unfortunately, that's a very regular occurrence. And then what we want is the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament to have the powers to manage immigration in Scotland, so we can guarantee the immigration levels that are right for Scotland. And in the first instance, that is not seeing it decline. The next question you might ask, Joe, is that workable? To which the answer is yes, of course it is, because if it's possible between different provinces and regions, both in Australia and Canada, it should be possible to do in the UK too. But there needs to be a political willingness. There needs to be a willingness in Westminster to work with the Scottish Government, and I would invite the incoming UK Government to respect the wishes of the electorate in Scotland on this and other issues and work with us to try and deliver better policies.
Angus Robertson, thank you. Now, sticking with Scotland, our guest of the day, Michael Gove, grew up in Aberdeen. That's a city where the Scottish Conservatives are hoping to win a seat. They're also targeting the border constituency of Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk, which has the smallest SNP majority in Scotland. Adding Fleming has paid it a visit.
This constituency's most famous former resident, the novelist Sir Walter Scott. He lived here at Abbotsford.
For years, the plot in this constituency was pretty predictable because it was a safe Liberal Democrat seat. It was a real page-turner at the last election in 2015, though, because the SNP won here, but they only beat the Tories by 328 votes.
It's a gripping battle between those who want an independent Scotland and those who support the Union, between Leavers and Remainers. The Tories reckon they can hoover up the votes of people who are opposed to independence. And their candidate here resigned as a member of the Scottish Parliament to pound the pavements full-time.
I wanted to show to the voters I recognised what was at stake, and what's at stake is Scotland's future within the United Kingdom. I don't want to have another referendum on breaking away from the United Kingdom. I want to stop that, and I feel that if the voters return me as their Member of Parliament on the 8th of June, I will be a powerful voice against the SNP and their plans to break up Britain.
You're not worried that by quitting as an MSP it made you look a bit cocky, almost like you thought you had victory in the bag and you were moving on to your next job?
Far from it. I never feel confident before elections. I work as hard as I possibly can to secure every single vote.
And the SNP?
All right, how are you? I'm all right. Come on, man. Come on.
I don't like dogs.
Come on.
They're more likely to be scaring our cameraman than talking about what used to be their signature issue.
What I think is really important is that in this constituency and in this election, the focus is not independence. I mean, we haven't had a Tory MP here for 52 years. That's because we don't relate to their values. And that was the Tory party of the past, never mind an increasingly right-wing party. So you'll see, and I'm sure you heard it today, that the Tories are trying to frame this in a constitutional question, as a constitutional question. Forget about who we are, vote for us purely on the Constitution. It's not about that.
The Lib Dems say it's about Brexit as they try not to get squeezed out of the picture altogether.
We are the only party that is pro-union and also for being part of the European Union. When I've been speaking to people, especially people, farmers, they are really deeply concerned and worried by Brexit. What is that going to mean for this local community? What does it mean for the farming subsidies? What about access to trade and labour?
Speaking of Labour, this is their campaign HQ, which suggests how seriously they're taking the battle for this seat.
Well, there's a polarisation, undoubtedly, between those who are virulent unionists and those who are virulent nationalists. However, during the length of the campaign, we hope that we are actually going to be able to cut through and make people realise that this is not just simply about another referendum, but it's also about the future of the borders. Because if you want to preserve the borders, keep the borders a living community, we've got to get more jobs in and better money for the people who live here.
It's maybe not as dramatic as Ivanhoe or Rob Roy, the books he's famous for, but it is a new chapter in politics here. Welcome to the general election in Scotland.
Adam Fleming there. How far is Ruth Davidson to be credited for detoxifying the Tory brand in Scotland?
Well, I don't know about the word detoxifying, but I think Ruth Davidson's been integral to the Scottish Conservative revival.
Right, because she's detoxified the brand. I mean, we heard there in that film, Tories have not appeared in some seats for 52 years, and they talk about pandas and the number of Tory MPs. So there must have been some detoxifying of the brand.
I think what Ruth's done is very convincingly ensured that people have a clear choice at this general election, and indeed at the Scottish parliamentary election last time round. There's only one party that's standing unambiguously for the United Kingdom and against a second independence referendum, and that's the Scottish Conservatives.
And the Labour Party.
Well, the Labour Party, as we heard from Jeremy Corbyn himself on Sunday night, is potentially open to independence. He changed the text of his speech. He originally was going to say that he rejected the idea of independence. He watered it down and indicated that he might well talk to the SNP. And at the same time, Nicola Sturgeon was playing footsie with him, also indicating that she might support Corbyn.
Because you believe the Tories will not give that second independence referendum, even if the SNP win a mandate for a second time, to use their words, at this election, she will deprive, and you think she should deprive, Theresa May, if the Tories win that election, of a second independence referendum.
The only effective way to ensure that a second independence referendum is stopped is for people to vote Conservative in Scotland. And I found when I was campaigning at the weekend in Aberdeen South with the candidate Ross Thompson, and in Banff and Buchan and in Murray, that everywhere I went there were people who'd been Labour and Liberal Democrat who were now supporting the Scottish Conservatives, not just because Ruth Davidson was head and shoulders above their own
because she's distanced herself, hasn't she, really, from the sort of Tory HQ?
Well, she's standing up for Scotland, but the other thing is that Ruth is...
She's different to Theresa.
She's actually surprisingly similar to Theresa. They're both church-going modernisers. They're both people who have a strong reverence for the Conservative Party's traditions, but also sit comfortably in the 21st century. But additionally, the only way that people can have the guarantee that we won't have the Scottish National Party both creating the instability of a second independence referendum and propping up a Jeremy Corbyn coalition in Westminster is by voting Conservative in Scotland.
Yes, he's ruled out a deal with the SNP. So
well, he
actually,
opened it up on Sunday night.
he has ruled out any sort of deal.
I think he ruled out a deal before he opened it
However
up.
convenient it may be for the Conservative Party to try and link Labour and the SNP. And you can look at a whole list of candidates for those constituencies in Scotland on the BBC website. Now, although the big beasts of politics were clashing over the bank holiday, there are some smaller political animals roaming the electoral savannah. Very poetic. Throughout this election, we've been searching out the smaller parties also standing for election, and today we've got the Young People's Party in our sights. The Young People's Party wants to rebalance the economy towards young people who they say are the most productive in society. They want to replace all taxes with a single land value tax based on the rental value of land. They'd like to cut all taxes on private income. They'd also like to roll welfare payments into a universal citizen's income that everyone is entitled to. On law and order, they would make release from prison dependent on achieving rehabilitation goals rather than specifying a length of time to be served. And they want to legalise drugs, brothels and fox hunting. Well, we've been joined in the studio by Thomas Hall. Welcome to the Daily Politics. You say you want to rebalance society in favour of what you call the productive society, in your mind, younger people. Why do you want to pit the generations against each other?
We don't want to pit generations against each other at all. Old people have young children, and younger people have older relatives and friends. And the real question is whether we pitch the funding of public services from those that contribute to the economy through their work, or those that collect the benefits of the country for free through rents.
Right, but you want to ultimately replace all taxes with a single land value tax. I mean, it may be very simple, but it's hardly fair, is it?
Well, we believe that land value tax is the fairest tax of all, and our views are supported over the ages by such great politicians as Winston Churchill, economists like Adam Smith and Joseph Stiglitz more recently. And many commentators have argued that a land value tax is the least bad tax.
Right, but it doesn't actually take any of the differences or variations in the population, where they live, their incomes and what they do.
Well, actually, I'd say that quite the opposite, in that those that occupy valuable location currently enjoy that value that's added by all of society for free. With council tax is there, but it's a very regressive tax.
Right, but couldn't you just improve on council tax?
Well, indeed. In fact, one very sensible way of ending up with the results that we're after would be a revaluation of the council tax bands, which hasn't been done since 1991, with probably putting a few more bans on the top end as well.
Right, and successive governments have obviously shied away from doing that. But basically, you want to tax wealth and assets and not income. Well,
so we don't see land as an asset in the traditional sense, and so we really want to identify those assets which are property in the sense that someone has made them and put their work into them, and that they really are theirs, from naturally occurring gifts of nature, if you like, that everyone contributes to the value of them. And we see in policies from other parties that certain industries are in line for nationalisation and others aren't, and you always ask, well, why one, not the other? And it really comes down to rent. We understand that a water company is different from a sofa manufacturer, for example.
Right, but the Labour Party manifesto says the party is considering looking at a land value tax to replace council tax and business rates. The Conservatives are calling it a garden tax. Would you support that?
So we do believe that a land value tax to replace council tax and business rates would be a step in the right direction. I think where the Young People's Party stands apart from the Labour Party is we are proposing that our tax would be a replacement of far more than council tax and business rates. We would raise 200 billion from a residential land value tax, and with that we would be able to replace council tax, stamp duty, land tax, inheritance tax, insurance premium tax, national insurance, employers' national insurance, a whole host of other small, annoying, difficult taxes as well.
Would you back a revaluation of council tax and properties in this country?
No, I think...
Why not? I mean, it isn't fair, is it, if it hasn't been done since 1991?
Well, I think that the first thing is that when you have revaluations of any tax, then sometimes you find that you create new winners and new losers and new unfairnesses. The thing about the land value tax is that it's an interesting idea, and as we've heard, it's been one that's been championed in the past by some distinguished figures, but it's always been one that's been championed by opposition parties. It was particularly championed, of course, by the Liberals in the 1920s and 1930s. But then, when people have been in government, they've found that the process of bringing about a land value tax, for a variety of reasons, hasn't been quite as easy as they might have hoped.
But just because it's difficult doesn't mean it isn't right. I mean, why is it that the focus has been on taxing income rather than people's assets? If you live in London and the South East, your asset has probably earned you a lot more money in some places than the money you earn from your job.
I think that the best form of taxation is to tax both assets and income, and to spread taxation and the taxation base as widely as possible. However elegant, and I admire the intellectual clarity of the Young People's Party's position, nevertheless, putting all your eggs in one taxation basket can be risky.
Right, do you accept that?
Well, no. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be pitching this. I mean, the ultimately all value is derived from the land we live on. Without it, there would be no value at all. And all the taxes that we currently have on income or on capital gain or all these other taxes ultimately are derived from value in the country that we live in. And so we think that we would be able to simplify the tax system from 16,000 pages down to about 100.
And all parties claim to be able to do that, except when they get into government, they make it more complicated.
Indeed.
And there must be a reason for that, mustn't there?
Well, yes, and that is that our current economy is based around a small number of people who benefit from the current situation against the rapidly diminishing number of homeowners in the young population who don't.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, fans of a neologism, that's a new word for you and certainly for me, will have been pleased to hear one being coined yesterday. It is glumbucket, and it's been used to describe the Prime Minister. Here she is being questioned by the Daily Mail sketch writer Quentin Letts at a campaign event.
I don't mean to be rude, but you seem to be a bit of a glumbucket. And can you tell us, are you enjoying the campaign? Will we see a bit more optimism, a bit more Boris perhaps, a bit more life, because it does seem a very subdued campaign so far.
So, there you have it, glumbucket. Let's talk about this new word with Clifford Sofield. He works for the Oxford English Dictionary and he is in our Oxford studio. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Glumbucket, is that a new word for you?
Well, it's a new word for me, but it's not a new word. It has been used before. It's not in the dictionary. But, and we haven't had a chance to research it completely, but this morning I came across a few examples from newspaper columns, and one of my colleagues found examples on Twitter going back to 2012. But I was really interested to learn that in 1923, the New York Times printed an article which described David Lloyd George as a gloom bucket, meaning a pessimist. This was after Lloyd George left Downing Street, and apparently he had a very pessimistic view of Europe's future prospects.
Right. So how do you write it? Is it one word or is it with a hyphen, 2 words with a hyphen?
Well, the Oxford English Dictionary doesn't prescribe how words should be written or used. We describe how they are used. And I can say that bucket words that are similar to this, like fuss bucket or lard bucket or love bucket, are generally written with a hyphen or as a single word.
Right.
And I've seen glum bucket both ways.
Right. Is it going to make it into the dictionary?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. Whether or not to include a word depends upon how widely it's used and how long it continues to be used. So we're monitoring glum bucket and we'll find out.
Right. Well, stay with us. Michael Gove, do you think that's a correct assessment? A glum bucket for the Prime Minister and that it's been a rather gloomy election?
No, I think glam bucket, pronounced glam bouquet, is probably a more...
When did you come up with that?
Just now.
Well done. What do you think about that new word, Clifford, I should say, sorry. Clifford Sofield. What did you say? Glam bucket?
Glam bucket, pronounced glam bouquet, as in hyacinth bouquet.
But it may kick off. Who knows? We'll have to find out.
Now, tell us about some of the other political words that sort of appear. Things like gerrymander and filibuster. These are all words that have evolved over time, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, these are all words that were coined to describe a particular thing. And you know, whether glum bucket is going to become part of political parlance or not in the future depends on whether people continue to use it. So, in a way, it's up to the British people to decide.
Any other phrases that have caught your eye during this election?
Well, I did have to do some interviews about mugwump, which is
that was
Boris Johnson used that
wasn't
word,
it?
yes, and that actually is quite an old political word, going back to well, the early 19th century, and then it had a lot of currency in the late 19th century with regard to one of the U.S. presidential elections.
I see. So, do you think you'll be advising the campaign to take your new word on board? What is it, glam bouquet?
A glam bucket, yes, a glamour bucket. I think that the campaign would be well advised to steal away from any of the portmanteau neologisms for which I'm
Or I thought you were going to say well advised to keep away from you. I thought you were going to say Michael Gove.
Well, I'll leave it up to the campaign chiefs to decide what degree of proximity is appropriate. But I think that in coming up with these new words and new phrases, I'm simply doing my best to add to the lexicographical
Clifford Sofield, I'm going to say
country.
thank you and stick to simple words, because from all of us here, thank you to Michael Gove for being guest of the day. Goodbye.
I want to know
what's really happening.
Who's saying what?
And why?
I've had enough spin.
Fake news.
Alternative facts.